the deer hair work done, so I want to show you trimming. Before I show you trimming though, one of the things you want to do with a deer hair bug is go through it. At this point in the fly, you can adjust the spots and things. I kind of look at the top of it to make sure all of these spots kind of line up. If the spot isn't distributed, the hair isn't distributed across the fly evenly, you can kind of adjust that a little bit. The thing I do is I look underneath here to make sure the collar and the belly hair is evenly distributed, because sometimes this bunch of hair will rotate a little bit as you do the rest of the fly. And then I just kind of comb through it to see if there's any folded over hair, because at this stage you can kind of pull it out before you trim it. And this one looks pretty good. So let's put it in here. And then before we start trimming it, let's talk a little bit about how bass bugs, kind of the design of bass bugs and how they perform when you fish them. One of the things about deer hair is no matter how you treat it or what you do to it, it's eventually going to soak water up through it. And if you trim this right tight to the bottom of the hook shank, oftentimes what will happen is the water will start to soak up into the top of the head, and eventually the top of the head outweighs the weight of the bend of the hook. And the fly will start landing upside down. You have to have more weight under the hook shank than you have on top of it to make the fly land upright. And so when I do my first cut here, I'm going to cut it. I'm going to leave quite a bit of hair underneath the hook shank. I think ideally you want up in this part, the forward part of the fly, you want hair that's going to be a quarter to maybe a third of the hook cape distance under the hook shank. And then as you get back to the hook shank, you can taper it up a little bit to help open up the hook. And then when you fish it, if you just treat the top of the fly, that bottom hair you leave there will soak some water up, and it will outweigh the top of the fly, even if the top of the fly soaks up water. And that's very true of poppers. With a Dalberg diver, because of this big collar on top and all the rest, this is probably the most challenging pattern to trim in a way that's going to make it land upright all the time. But I think if you leave hair underneath it, that will help. So the first cut I'm going to make is I'm going to go here on the bottom. I'm going to trim out the bottom. And so I'm going to use this tool here. It's a stone faux tool with a razor blade in it. I've got it set at just a slight curve. It's not much, not perfectly straight. It's just a little bit of a curve. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to hold it by the hook. Hold the hook up, and I want to make a cut. If I can imagine a vertical line here between the eye of the hook and the hook point. Imagine a vertical line. You want the cut to be at a 90-degree angle to that line. So I'm going to come in here and we'll get that first cut going. Okay, so there's what the first one looks like. You can see I kept it pretty, so it's if you could imagine that the vertical line of the hook bend of the hook itself, the bend of the hook, and then this, they're at a 90-degree angle, which is what you want. Now with this pattern, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start with my scissors. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in, I'm going to trim out, you see this hair that's kind of angling forward around the eye of the hook. I'm going to start by trimming out the eye of the hook, going this way on the pattern. So now you can see I've kind of cleaned out that face a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by making a cut on each side. And notice that what I'm attempting to do is create a symmetrical side here, where this side has as much hair as this side over here. And then I'll kind of follow those cuts around and I'll start to get the shape for my fly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim back to the collar, but not into the red. Up to the red, but not into the red. And sometimes it's actually easier if you leave a little bit of the white, because I can come in with the corner of my razor blade and take that out a little easier. Okay, so now you can see that I've got kind of my roughed out shape here. So now what I'm going to do is I'll put this back in. Now when I'm looking at the depth of my head, I want the depth of my head to be equal to the hook gape plus maybe about a quarter to a third at the most. You know, you don't want to leave the head too big, but you don't want to get too small either. But if it seems to balance out around a hook gape plus a little bit. So I think what I'm going to do first is I'll come in here and I'm going to do a side cut down along the side. And I'll just kind of trim here. And then I'm going to do a side cut down along this side. And what I'll do is I'll come in with the corner of my razor blade. Get up here, you can see if you kind of do the corner of your razor blade. Let me go ahead and take it out. If you do the corner of your razor blade, you can kind of get in there and get some of that hair out of there. So now I look at my sides and notice I've narrowed up the sides. I've kind of kept my shape going. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here along the top of the bug. And I'm going to really flatten out the top of this fly. Come back and clean it out. And now I'm looking at the depth of the body, and I remember I'm shooting for about the hook gape of this part of the body here. The hook gape plus maybe a third to a quarter to a third. So I'll come back and trim it out a little bit more. Okay, so now you'll notice that I have these corners on the top of the bug. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those corners on. I want to start getting this rounded shape to it. So one of the things I don't do, when I do my blade, I don't push straight against the hair. I'll come at kind of a 45-degree angle and let the hair slide across. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to trim around and get the corner of that fly out. So now if you look at it, you see how this side is starting to be curved. The corner is still sitting up on that edge, so I'm going to take that one out now. Come in here and clean up all those white and gray hairs that are up against the collar so I don't see anything but the red collar. And this is still a little too deep, so I'm going to come and do another cut on the top. Smaller one this time. Just kind of go back, flatten the top a little bit. Not as dramatic as I did the first time. So you see what I'm doing is I'm kind of slowly working the fly down to where I want it. You know, you put a lot of time into spinning the hair onto the hook, so you know you want to take your time trimming it out. Plus I really enjoy the trimming part. It's where the fly kind of starts to come together. I see what the pattern looks like. Let's go ahead and get a little bit more off from that edge, kind of keep that symmetrical side to side symmetry going. And so now I'm going to take and I'm going to look at it head on. And it's looking pretty symmetrical, the front part of it. And what I'm going to do is I will now go ahead and I'm going to actually come around the curve. I'll put a little more curve in it. So I'm just going to kind of work my way around the fly like this. And just to keep getting it a nice curved look to it. And one of the things I want you to note is, if you look on the edge of my razor blade, it's almost like little grains of sand. I'm keeping the blade really flat to the deer hair head. I'm not doing deep cuts. I'm keeping it really flat, which allows me to just kind of slowly get it down to where I want it to be. And of course, the more of them you do, the faster you get at this. So now I'm going to turn it over. Okay, so now let's look at it again. Yeah, this is getting pretty good. Now I'm going to turn it over, and what I want to do is, remember I needed to keep some hair here, but right now, if you look, I've only got about half the gape is open, and I want more than that. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to just flatten this towards the latter half of the hook shank, not out front here yet. But back in here, I'm going to kind of curve this down in. And notice how much gape that opened up. Now I'm down to about 3/4 of a hook gape. Okay. And then I'm going to just come and take the sides off underneath here a little bit. Keeping that symmetry going from side to side, looking at it from the bottom. And let's go ahead and taper this a little bit here, the front edge. So now you can see I've got the bottom going. Let me take some of these, there's a little bump of hair right there. That's starting to look pretty good. Let's look at it from this angle again. That's starting to look pretty good. Maybe the head may be a little bit big yet. I guess I'll come and do one of those come around the fly one more time, just to drop it down a little bit. It's still just a touch maybe on the big side. And see, once again, I'm doing that 45 on it. I'm not trying to push straight at it. And to be honest, this is a point in the fly where you can just kind of get lost in cleaning it up and messing with it. Let me come in here and clean up around the eye of the hook just a little bit more now that I've kind of cleaned away some of the hair. And open up the hook just a little bit. When you get right in here around the eye of the hook, sometimes it's easier to work with it by doing a few scissor cuts than trying to get the razor blade in there. This side's a little bit bigger. Let's take it back just a little bit. Yeah, there we go. That's starting to look pretty good. Now, what I'm going to do, the body's starting to look pretty good. Now I'm going to come in, I'm going to trim the collar. And I want to keep the collar pretty tall to start with. So I'm going to use my curved scissors, and I'm just going to look at it, and I'm going to come out here and just get a trim out. I don't want to go too deep into that collar to start with. Like the body of the fly, you can, if it's too big, you can always adjust it. If you get too deep into it first cuts, then of course you can't really do much about it. So you can see it's still not symmetrical, but it's getting close. This side needs to come down a little bit. So that's starting to look kind of symmetrical. Now what I'm going to do is I'll come in here and I'll take my razor blade and I'll kind of come around this. Now this hair is going to move around some as you cut it. It's not going to, because it's a lot looser because it's farther up. So the hair kind of moves as you draw the blade through it, but you are getting cuts on it. And I'm kind of looking at it here. This side is still just a little tall. Let me come in with my scissors here. That's starting to look pretty good. Let me kind of come back in here and take a little more off the body right in front of the collar. Okay, I think that's starting to look pretty good. Like I said, you could sit here and mess with this for the longest time if you wanted to. And it just kind of depends on how much of a perfectionist you want to be and how much time you want to spend, you know, trimming these out. All right, so there we are. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in. You remember that little thread band we put in there to pull my hackle back so I wouldn't accidentally cut it out as I was trimming it. I'm just going to take my razor blade, pull that out, and you notice all that hackle popped right out and kind of helped to fill in this collar and give us a nice transition between the head and the tail of the fly. And now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take my red thread and I'm going to wrap a red thread head. I'm going to wrap a red thread head here on the hook of the eye, or on the, a red thread head behind the eye of the hook. And this will just help to secure those gel spun wraps, plus it adds a little accent of color on the front of the fly. And whatever color you choose to put in. I don't do red on all my flies. I do them on a lot of my flies because I think it's a nice little pop of color there. And the fish don't seem to mind it. So as with all my flies, I'm kind of cinching those wraps back in behind the eye of the hook. And when I get out here, I'll take my whip finish tool and I will whip finish it. Pull it back, trim that thread out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails, and I'm going to really saturate this thread head with this Sally Hansen's. It's a hard, as its name implies, it's a hard coat when it cures, and it really helps to make these flies more durable. And that red thread head then will you know, those red thread wraps will help secure the wraps underneath at the deer hair work. But you don't want to leave the eye of the hook with the cement in the eye of the hook, because if you do, the glue is hard. So you can come back before you fish it and poke it out, you know, with a little, dubbing needle or a little needle of some kind. But almost always you'll leave some sharp edges, which can abrade your leader. So you want to clear it out before it cures. So the easiest way to do that, just use a feather. Just get a big feather off one of your capes and just pull the feather right through it. That'll pull all that excess glue out of there, leaving all of it on the thread wraps where you want it. And then you can see the eyes nice and clear. Okay, so you could go fish it like this if you want. It probably would fish just as well, but my next step is going to be to add some eyes and some legs, some rubber legs to this fly. So we'll do that next. So I've got my eyes. I'm using some Sabai Ultra 3D eyes. These are red, crimson red edges on it, which is a nice match for this fly. So we'll put that aside. And then I'm going to use, this package was mismarked. They said it was yellow, but they were red legs that were in here. I'm going to use these barred Sexy Floss legs. And what I like about these is they're very strong. They're very tough. So I'll pull 3 of them. There was a time when I used to put up to 6 legs on a pattern. But 3 to 4 is probably enough. I'm going to do 3 on this one. This stuff is, the Sexy Floss is a, I don't know quite how to describe the material, but it's a really strong material and it doesn't break. And so we're going to put these legs in the fly. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Real quick, in my book, Tying and Fishing Deer Hair Flies, the flies I tie, I actually, when I do the first stack of hair and then I loop the, put a knot, do a little overhead knot and put the legs on the hook shank and I press them back. And then I finish spinning out the head and then I trim around the legs the whole time. And you can do that. It's not impossible to do that. But there was also in the book, there was a sidebar article on threading the legs through and then gluing them in place. And I've taken to doing that because it's so much, the trimming process is so much easier without having to worry about the legs. So I'm going to put the legs through, but before I put the legs through, I'm going to create my eye sockets for my eyes. And I'm going to use this little cauterizing tool that you can buy. Whitetail Fly Tying Supply has it. You can see it, see how the tip is glowing red. So I'm going to just come in here and I'm just going to place my eyes and I'm going to just burn out the little eye socket. And this tool is a better way to get a more precise eye socket in your fly. Now I will caution you, it smells bad when you do it. But I'm going to come in here, let's get on this side. And you can see the smoke kind of coming off the fly. And it does smell, it smells like burning hair. So, and then come over here on this side. What I'm going to do is, see, there's the eye socket on that side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and kind of in the same location, I'll just do a little reference mark. So I know that it's right opposite across. Now I can rotate this over and create a little eye socket here. Okay, so there you can see there's the eye socket on that side and on that side. Then take something, I just use my comb, use the edge of my comb, and I'm just going to brush out the ash, get the ash, the burnt hair that's in there out of there, and get down to just the regular hair. Okay, now that I have my eye sockets in place, I'm going to thread my legs through. And where I thread my legs through is I'm going to thread them through right here, kind of right about here, just in front of the diving collar. And when I put the needle through, I'm going above the hook shank. Okay, so let's take my legs and we'll match up the tips here. And what I'm using is just a darning needle with a pretty big eye on it. So I've got these tips matched up, so I'll put them through the needle. Just like that, and just come back a little ways. Now take your needle and insert it there right in front of the diving collar and have it come out the other side, okay? Now, when you pull this through, pull gently. Actually, these are coming through pretty easy. Sometimes, if they're hard, if they don't come through very, very smooth, if you're really having to pull on them, just kind of pull real slow, because it's some material that's easy to break. This material is tough enough that it's pretty hard to break it, so you can put quite a bit of pressure on it. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back with it. I'm going to just put some downward pressure on it to kind of take it down towards the eye of the hook. Now I'm going to bring it back towards me just a little bit, and I'm going to come back in with my Dave's Flexament, And I'm going to get my little needle tool here. And I'm going to come in on this side of the fly. You notice I've extended the legs out there longer on this side than this side at the moment. Because what I'm doing is I'm going to be pulling them back, going from your perception, from your angle, I'm pulling down. I'm going to shorten up this side. I'm going to pull this side back into the body. So I'm going to put some glue right in here on the legs. So open up my glue bottle. And we'll come in here and get a good coat of glue on this. What's interesting about this is when you first pull it, it's got some resistance, but when the glue hits it, suddenly it kind of gets pretty smooth. So you can kind of get that glue worked in there, put a little downward pressure on it, and just drop them in place and leave them there. And that glue will hold them pretty well. I have had legs come out once I fished the fly quite a lot. And the hair really gets saturated and stuff, sometimes the glue lets go, but by that time it's probably time to put a fresh bug on anyway. So now what I do is I come in here and I'm going to come down and I'm going to, where I want my legs to come, I want my legs to be about as long as my tail, roughly. I mean, I want the legs, if you cut them too short, you know, you're not going to get as much movement out of them. So I come down here and I hold them together, try to hold them together right straight under the fly. Then I come in and I just trim with my scissors. Now when I come back, you can see that they're a little shorter. They're a little short of the legs. They're just a little bit shorter. That's a good length for them. That'll give a lot of good movement in the water. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start down here. Now, you may recall that I said Dave's Flex Cement is this goop cement. I put goop in my bottle and then I add toluene to it and thin it out, and I just kind of keep a running supply of Dave's Flex Cement in my bottle that way. Again, toluene is a nasty substance, so you don't want to leave it somewhere where you'll be smelling the fumes. You know, like I said, I leave it out in my garage. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this glue, put some of it in the eye socket, and I'm really after the thinner more than the glue. Then I'll take a little dab of the goop and drop it in on top of that. And the thinner in this one will take the goop, and it'll help draw it down into the eye socket. And I think it makes the eyes a little bit tougher. I have knocked the eyes off these, so it's not perfect, but I think it helps a little bit. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to put a little drop of glue right down in that eye socket and let it kind of penetrate down in there. So I can kind of see it dropping, soaking down in. Then I'm going to take, and I created another little tool here. I have this in my book. Again, it's just a chopstick. It's like a little paddle, and I put a Dremel, just a little cup on it so I can manipulate the eye on the other end. It's just a little homemade tool. So I'm going to take my goop, put a little bit in the eye socket there. And that first coat of glue is interacting with that second piece I just put in, and I can kind of see the eye getting drawn down into the socket. Now I'll take my eyeball and I'll set it in here on that spot. And then again, I'll come back with my tool. Again, I dremeled in a little cup here on that end, so I can kind of use that to manipulate my eye into place. And I'll come around, I'll just repeat that whole process on this side. Get a little bit of the goop here, put it into the eye socket. And I see a little reaction from the first one I put in. I can see a little bit of the reaction with it. What it does, the glue kind of gets shiny and it kind of sinks down into the eye socket a little bit. And that's kind of what you want. You want to try to draw this eye or this glue down into the hair a little deeper. It'll help make it a little more durable. I love putting the eyes on them. The eyes are when the fly really, to me, just kind of comes to life. So there you have it. I'll give you a front view, side view, and you can kind of see the legs coming out the bottom there. Give you a top view. So there it is. There's a Dalberg Diver, a great color pattern. You know, this one right here, I would fish for bass, but I'd put this on I'd throw this for pike too, although pike can destroy deer hair flies pretty quick. The other thing I do with these is, and I will talk more, I've talked about this in my new book. In my new book, Tactics for Bass and Other Warm Water Fish, I'll use a clip on the front of this fly so it has a complete hinge. And if it's got a complete hinge, the fly will tend to dive deeper. And so, I'm going to do a little video in my tackle rigging section on setting up leaders with clips. But you can clip this fly out and get it to dive a little deeper. But there's a nice Dalberg Diver. It's got some nice colors on it, some nice patterns on it, and I'm sure it will fish real well. So thank you for watching. Again, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.